Crime, corrections, and culture, folks. Here we are. Persephone and I are going to give you a good show. We tell you the truth and nothing but the truth about crime, criminals, corrections, correctional culture. We love super chats and super stickers. With that, I turn it over to Persephone.
Please don't forget to follow us on Twitch and find us on Spotify. Check out the website www.thecapitalistcorner.org. Become a channel member. There's loads of members-only content, but it's also a good way to support the channel and keep it going. And that's all I have to say about that. So, we're reading Inside the Criminal Mind, and we're on the last 2 chapters. And this chapter was called... This is a very interesting... The whole book has been very interesting, but this chapter was especially interesting to me. This chapter, chapter 15, is called To Change a Criminal. And the chapter starts out by introducing a guy named Leroy, who was in St. Elizabeth's because he committed a crime and then he claimed insanity and he was sent to St. Elizabeth's. And he has a meeting with Yochelson, who proceeds to tell him exactly who he is. Doesn't give him a chance to give any sub stories. What also knows nothing about this dude, but just tells him exactly who he is. And Leroy just has to sit there. Yochelson says to him, "I'm going to make some statements about you, and you just tell me if they're true or if they're not true." So he starts telling Leroy exactly who he is. And every time Leroy tries to say, "Oh, but the reason," Yochelson's like, "No, I don't care. Is it true or is it not true?" And Leroy just has to sit there and sort of nod. And some things he nods, and some things he says, "Yeah, I guess you could say that." And Yochelson then tells him, "So you're too much of a coward to admit these things." And reading that, I thought, I don't know how I would cope if someone did that to me. Did anyone ever do anything similar to you?
Yeah. So, when I was first in prison, I was 21. I'd been in about 6 months at the time. Maybe 9 months at the time. And I got a cellmate who had been in jail for 21 years. And I told him I didn't belong in prison, and he told me I was exactly where I needed to be. That's just once. But Brett and I spoke to each other like that all the time. It was a necessity, and it's not like, I don't know. It's funny because I know people can't take it. When you talk to people, I'll start to tell somebody my assessment of them, and they get very uncomfortable very quickly. But the thing is, you can evade it, but it's not going away. Right?
Yeah.
So if it's there, it's better to acknowledge it, deal with it, fix it, than pretend it's not there and have it keep coming up.
This is all very true. So, continuing with the story of Leroy, Yochelson tells Leroy that he has 3 options. He can continue his life as a criminal, he can kill himself, which will be a benefit to society, or he can change.
Yeah.
And Leroy, he decides that he's going to do this program with Yochelson, and he's going to commit to change. And he got super excited. He was, it was this new exciting thing that he's going to do. And then he says that he started getting he started getting high on responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how, none of this is written from Leroy's perspective, but they say he started getting high on responsibility, and he thought that he was going to change faster and better than everybody else.
Yeah.
Right? And so just on that, did you ever have a thing like that? Because that was a weird thing for me to read. Getting high, which which kind of makes sense, because if you think a criminal thinks of himself as a good person, now you start doing these good things.
So it's difficult for me to assess because so I had already gone through a process of change before. I started to change and then I backslid. So the second time around, I think there was a holier than thou aspect to it, but doing it better than everybody else ever did it. I don't know that I had that, but I also by the time I read, for instance, Inside the Criminal Mind, I had already kicked heroin. I already decided to change my life. I had already read Atlas Shrugged. I had already read The Virtue of Selfishness, a lot of self-improvement books. So I don't know that I'm comparable to somebody that's just fresh going in. You know what I mean? Maybe not. I don't know. But I think there was the holier than thou thing. I think that was there.
So,
But it's a
I mean,
long time ago, too. I mean, you're talking, it's now 22 years ago.
so they're doing the group therapy, not the group therapy, but the group sessions, and they're going through their thought reports.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about what that is?
Right. So I didn't actually do the thought reports that they're talking about. Their initial program was 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. You went to this program. And what you had to do was every day make thought reports. You had to chronicle what your thinking was for the day. So you have to pay attention to your thoughts throughout the day and write them down unfiltered. So no assessment. So it's not, well, let me not include this. If you thought, oh, I felt like breaking that light, you felt like breaking that light. Because what you want to do is expose your thoughts to them, and then they're going to see how your thoughts are comporting with a responsible way of life or the criminal thinking errors, and then they can discuss them with you. So, but if you're filtering out, then they're not getting the real deal. I mean, it'd be the equivalent of, if you go to a doctor and you've got a stomach ache and you've got a backache and a chest ache, but you only tell them about the stomach ache, so you don't tell them the rest of the symptoms. How can the doctor diagnose you? Similarly, if you are keeping things from them, they're not going to know how to help you.
Yeah. So the note in this chapter at the beginning of this chapter is, with the exception of a follow-up note at the end, this chapter appears as it was written for the 1984 edition.
Okay.
So all of this is unchanged from what was discussed, what was in the book in 1984.
Okay.
So you did a version of that though, of the thought reports,
I certainly talked to Brent about it. We would go over it, but honestly, I just thought it was too time consuming. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, especially because I'm not going to a program. I'm going to be doing it, and I could just figured I could do it myself. I've done thought reports before, but not the phenomenological thought reports that they're talking about.
Yeah. So the program, as they describe it, this program that Leroy was doing, was a whole bunch of them, and he first had a bunch of interviews with Yochelson before he could even talk about a program. He said, well, can I get into the program? Because, he wanted to be released from the hospital and all of these things. And Yochelson was like, well, no, before we even talk about that, we're going to discuss exactly who you are. So they did that before he was invited to join this program. And then it was a bunch of them sitting in a room, and he said, unlike a lot of the psychotherapy group sessions that he'd been in, which was, sort of the participants leading the discussion and the doctor just sitting there, this was them giving their thought reports and Yochelson picking up on like a small thing and then making the whole discussion about that, which he said
Yeah.
was really interesting.
Yeah.
So there there was a question that I wanted to ask you. So he in the beginning was quick to point out things that other people were doing wrong. So in one of the sessions, one of the criminals had said something to Yochelson, and Yochelson was responding to him, and he was arguing. And Leroy said to him, don't argue with the doctor, like he knows what he's talking about. And he was expecting a pat on the back, for being such a good participant. And Yochelson said to him, no, no, that's not what we're here for. And he was like quite taken aback. And he was highly critical of everybody else, but was loath to turn that on himself.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you were starting to go through this whole, I have a lot of questions about this.
Yeah, I was highly critical of everybody, but including myself. And still am, by the way.
Were you more critical? Was there a point where you were more critical of other people than
No.
of yourself?
No.
Okay. So, to find my question.
Now, pre-reading Inside the Criminal Mind, maybe I don't remember. You know what I mean? But I know once I started on the Samenow's path, for lack of a better word, no.
So, as they're talking about these group sessions, and after he talks about he's critical of everybody else but not of himself. One guy said that the reason it's difficult to look inward and look at those things is it's like touching a live wire, right? It's painful.
Mm-hmm.
So the question that I had when I read that was like, what was the most difficult thing or the most painful thing when you looked at yourself? What was the most painful thing to look at?
Oh, God, I don't know. How insecure I was, how bad my self-esteem was, what a coward I'd been my whole life. None of that's fun. I don't know that I could pinpoint a single thing.
I mean, I feel like that's all stuff that would be pretty painful to look at.
It wasn't fun.
No, I can imagine it wasn't fun. So, James says it's a heavy question. So, as I was reading this, I was thinking, this sounds insane. Right? So, he's talking about Leroy and going through this process of change, and he says there are no shortcuts, only endless drudgery. Is that what it felt like to you?
No.
Were you excited about changing?
Yes, very. And not only that, but I love learning. So, no, it didn't feel like drudgery. At times, it felt unjust when you're doing what's right and getting, punished for doing what's right while people are getting rewarded for doing what's wrong. That is a part of life, and I get that. So if that's what he means by the drudgery, that you don't always get an immediate payoff, and you don't always get everybody telling you, hey, attaboy, you're not always getting that. So if that's what he's talking about, then yeah, but no, I don't. It's hard because I'm going by memory too, but I don't think I experienced it in that way. I experienced it more as of a challenge. Sometimes it was like, fuck, you got to give up something else now. I don't know if we talked about this, but Brent one day, Brent was doing laps and I was sitting down, or no, I was doing laps and Brent was sitting down, I think, and he was looking very pensive, and I went and talked to him, and he brought up how, all the various things that the two of us did that were indicative of stealing or being dishonest, and he's like, this is so hard to do. And that was heavy, and it did that. Then it was like, fuck, because now we got to stop doing this and this. So that was tough in a way, but then once I realized it, the implications and ramifications, then it just was like, I don't need to have stolen sponges in my cell to clean with. Like, I don't need that. I don't need the extra set of blankets. And I just, if I once I realized it was wrong, boom, it was done. That was it.
So I have additional questions, but I want to read. I want to read why I asked this question. So Leroy believed that once he had learned to be responsible, he would have no worries. But Yochelson warned him that he'd be tension-free only when he was dead.
Yeah.
Um, he so then he complained that all of this was Leroy complained that all of this was meaningless. There'd be a ray of sunshine as one problem was solved, and then clouds seemed to descend. Another day, another set of problems. He wanted to say, the hell with it, why should he bother? Why should he worry? If this was life, it was not what he bargained for. And Yochelson said to him, well, what are your options? Think about your options. Your options are go back to the gutter, kill yourself,
Or change.
or change. His had been a life of emergencies all of his own making. There were no goals, only an interminable series of conquests to shore up an inflated but precarious self-image. He could not see any light at the end of the tunnel. He couldn't understand why anyone would work and work and work and work without a guarantee that it would all pay off. He demanded insurance against failure, and by failure he meant anything less than being tops at whatever he did. So that's why I asked, did you ever feel like changing? Hold on. I wrote this question down and I have to find it.
Okay. I'm not going to go anywhere.
Oh, I thought you might. I thought you might like get up and go to another room. Okay, so so many questions. So it's only going to be tension free when you're only going to be tension free when you're dead. There's no end to the problems, etc., etc., etc. Was there any point? At what point did you understand? Here's the question exactly as I phrased it. When did you start to understand what it was really going to cost to fundamentally change yourself as a person?
That I don't know. I don't know if if you know what it entails. I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know how to answer the question because I just don't know when that occurred.
Did it ever occur? Did you ever sit and think the cost of this is extremely high? I mean, the cost might have been worth it. You might have acknowledged that the cost was worth it. But was there ever a point where you thought the cost of this...
When you say cost, see, I understood the alternatives, right? So I had a goal, two goals: get out, stay out, right? And I understood that if I wanted to get out and I wanted to stay out, that I had to really make these changes. So I understood. That was crystal clear to me. So I wasn't like, oh, this isn't worth it. That didn't occur because I understood very well what was at stake. I think that a lot of people maybe don't understand what's at stake. I did. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't times when I got discouraged. There's times when, when you're changing and you have inmates that then, talk shit to you and you've got to just eat it and you can't, you don't do what you want to do. When every fiber of my being wants to bash this dude's skull in and I can't because I understand the consequences, that's difficult. But I never said, well, this isn't worth it. Am I making sense to you? I always knew what I needed to do, or I didn't know all the, everything I needed to do. But I always knew if I go back down that road, it's a bad ending. And I don't want a bad ending. I want a good ending.
So he talks about the criminals who, when they want to get out and they want to stay out, but that doesn't mean that they change as a person. Mm-mm. It means that they think about ways that they could commit crimes without being caught.
Well, not even always, though. I mean, like this old man Gary Castingway, who may be the closest to a real sociopath that I've ever met. Real nice guy, friendly guy. When I say sociopath, I never got the sense that he had a conscience, like he felt guilty about anything. But I got along with him. And he said to me, he said, everybody that comes to prison realizes they don't like it. Right? But then they get out and they come back. And his point was that they are who they are. Now, he wasn't optimistic about anybody changing, so he's wrong about that. But his point is, if you take a guy, just because you don't like prison, but then you inject him back into the world when he gets released, he may not want to go back. So what? He has no habits, no conception of responsible thinking or living, no conception of effort, nothing. So he's out there, and even if he wants to not be a criminal, he has no idea how. He doesn't know what it means to go get a job, to put up with somebody's bullshit, to work hard, to have a good work ethic, how to deal with other people, how to talk to people, nothing. So it's not a matter that the guy says, oh, I don't want to change. Some do, don't get me wrong, a lot. But even if the guy wants to change, if he doesn't know how and he doesn't know what direction to go, he's fucked.
So the reason I ask is because your motivation for changing doesn't seem to have been, well, I realize I'm a shitty person. It was, I want to get out of prison and I want to stay out of prison. But a lot of people have that same motivation,
right?
And
but I wanted to. Well, but I want.
To the level you did.
But I wanted to be a good person too. You know what I mean? I did want to be a good person. But why do you want to be a good person? I don't want to just be a good person so that you can kick me in my face and I'm going to turn the other cheek. I want to be a good person because I want to live a good life. And I'm not going to apologize for that, right? And I'm not saying you're asking me to, but like I'm not becoming a good person so I can be a martyr.
When did you realize that you weren't a good person?
Oh, I don't know.
Because so it's so weird to hear you say that, because we talk about when you got to prison, you thought you were a good person, and then when you're talking about.
But hold on. Let me just be clear about this. I didn't think that doing robberies and shooting at people were good things to do. That I was a good person. What I thought was there was a core that was good, that was separate from what I was doing. When I realized that was bullshit, I don't know. I just realized at some point that's just not logical. To try to separate a person from what that person does is just silly. And you'll hear that in prison programs. You have to separate the person from the behavior. No, actually, I don't, because the person is the behavior.
That's interesting to me. I know that you had said that before, that you believed you're a good person who was doing bad things, but it's still funny. I thought I was a good person. I wanted to be a good person, and I know you. It's a long time ago, so it's hard to remember, and there probably wasn't a distinct moment. It's just an interesting thing. So,
Hey, tearing them up. Tearing up.
So Nicole Hingle says, I imagine freedom can feel overwhelming after a long incarceration. Was it overwhelming?
Some things were. Like, my friend Subby is a people person. And so when I was on the phone with him and I was in prison and we were talking about my first day out, I said, yeah, I don't want to be around a lot of people. I said, let's just you and me, my sister. He's like, no, there won't be a lot of people there. He's like, my two kids, my ex-wife, Rochelle's going to be there, my dad, his wife. And it's like he just wasn't computing what I was telling him about not being around a lot of people. And, then people would come over and I just want to be alone. My sister, invited me over to her family's house, for, I think it was Christmas. And I had only been, not even a month out, and I'm there, and there's all these people that I don't know, and they're all very nice, but I'm not in that spot of, I'm not used to socializing. And then everybody, so what was it like? And I get it, but like, what do you want me to say? What was it like? You sit around and you fucking talk and eat soups. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? I don't. What do you mean? What was it like? You know what I mean? It's not exciting. It's like Groundhog Day. So yeah, it was. It wasn't like there were moments it was overwhelming, I should say, but by and large it wasn't. But again, you have to understand something. I also had an incredible support system coming out of the gate. I had a place to live. I had my friend Subby. I had Todd Feinberg who was there for me. I had my sister. I had my cousin. You know, so there were people. I had Melissa. There were people there for me that were very supportive. So that's a huge help.
Yeah, I'm sure it would have been more difficult if you came out. I'm just thinking about Brooks from the Shawshank Redemption. Um, okay, so back to Leroy. Yochelson tells him that it's like to change your to change your criminal thinking is going from one extreme to another, right? And I know you didn't follow this exact same thing, but the question Leroy says this is excessive, right? Because he goes out and he drinks a few sips of beer, and he says Yochelson viewed it as like a catastrophic thing, right? That he had a few sips of beer, and he was like, "This is excessive." When you were like trying to change, was there anything that felt excessive to you? I know it's not
Um,
exactly the same situation.
yeah, I think so. Sure. I don't remember what. Maybe like Brent stopped watching any violence on TV, for instance, and I thought that was probably a good idea, but I didn't do it. I didn't think it was that important. You know what I mean?
I do. Reading this, it it sounds really difficult to change. It sounds like work that no normal person, criminals aren't normal.
They
Like,
say there's no harder thing in human psychology. That's what the two of them say.
so looking at it, what they ask you to do and then
Hmm.
what makes sense to do, it seems almost not impossible, because I know it is possible, but it seems so ridiculous. You've got to pay attention to all your thoughts, which most people aren't doing. Then you have to have someone, you know, working with you so that you can, they can look at what you're saying and about your thoughts, and you can't make up any stories and any excuses and any rationalizations. And you have to do this continuously. People aren't doing that in their daily life. People aren't paying attention to all of their thoughts and what it means. Oh, here's another thing that I wrote down, and you said something similar to this in on everyday ethics. So Yochelson asked Leroy, "Who are you? How do you affect people? What do you want to become? And
Hmm.
what do you expect of others?"
Hmm.
And these were the questions that he had to keep asking himself.
Yeah.
I mean, do you do that?
Yeah.
Do you ask yourself these
Yeah,
questions?
I don't know that I got it from him or that I did the exact thing, but I always ask myself how my behavior is affecting other people. I always ask what do I want out of life? What am I willing to do to get it? Am I on the right trajectory? I don't know if I put it in those exact terms, but those things are always there. Yeah.
What do you expect of others feels like a big one.
It is, and I realize that unless somebody makes a commitment to me, they don't owe me a fucking thing. Right? So if somebody comes and tells me today, "Hey dude, you've been here long enough, you got to move out." I got to move out. I don't have any hard feelings for him. You know what I mean? Now, if he says to me, "You can stay here for 5 years," and then he tells me after 2, "You got to go," I'm going to be pissed. if you tell me you're going to do something, if you give me your word, then I expect you to come through with it, and I'm going to get pissed if you don't. But outside of that, people don't owe me anything.
Which is weird because, criminals do
They
weirdly
do.
expect people to uh, adhere. That's not the right word.
I think that's a
Conform.
good place to stop for today.
Okay.
So I have a phone call to make. It's kind of important.
Oh, right.
But
I
thank
have,
you, Persephone. Great questions. Audience,
I have,
thank
I have
you.
more.
We will be. Are we going to be here tomorrow or maybe not?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, no show tomorrow, but we will be
Sorry.
back on Monday. Thanks, everybody.